I'd just like to, on behalf of Aspect, acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to the land, sea, waterways, and community, and we pay our respects to them and their cultures and to their elders, past and present. And we would like to extend our warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today.
Okay, and we would like to know that everyone's welcome in this session, and we want you to feel as though it's safe to be yourself. During this session, we'll also be using strategies that help us stay focused and comfortable, and we want everyone else to be able to do the same thing. So if there's anything that helps do that, so if you want to get up, move around, that's perfectly cool. Turn your camera off if that helps. Have like a nice beverage with you if that helps, or fidget tools, whatever it is that helps for you to participate best in this session. Okay, so a little bit about Aspect Autism Friendly. This team has been around for, I'd say it's more than 5 years at this point, and it started off as our manager and one person going out and doing a few things in different organisations to make the world a little bit more autism friendly. We've since grown that. I think our team's sitting somewhere around about 10 people over Victoria and New South Wales. And the aim of the team is to go out to various different community organisations and make changes that make those organisations and places and spaces more friendly for autistic people to be able to sort of venture into them. And this also, I find, benefits a whole wide range of people outside those that are autistic. So people who have ADHD, other neurological conditions, people who have encountered trauma. The changes that we aim to make with alongside organisations often benefit like a really wide variety of people. The team is a collective of autistic and non-autistic people working in partnership. We really value the experience and lived experience that autistic people, professionals, and we have some parents as well in our team bring, and we have a wide range of professional experience that the team members have brought from their sort of former work experience, including education. There's a few of us that have done that in a former life, support workers and corporate as well. And meet the presenters. We've had like such a lovely and warm intro already, so I won't go on too much about what it is that I do. I started in research. Throughout that time, I was working as a co-producer on a variety of different projects. We realised that we were doing that within our research centre, but not more broadly so much across Aspect, and wanted to find a way to do that more holistically across the entire organisation. We've got about 1,500 staff across education, therapy, and a variety of other smaller business units, and wanted to incorporate partnership with autistic people across all of those. And my job in a nutshell is to help support that across the organisation.
Thanks so much, Ainslie. And similarly, I won't harbour too much about myself, given that beautiful but also very awkward intro when you hear that something that you've written yourself. But I guess for me, the turning point which landed me at Aspect earlier this year was really having led diversity and inclusion work, and then also having the intersection of a child who is autistic and thinking about the world that at a point in time she will emerge into, wondering what role I could play to actually make that a friendlier world and a more inclusive world for her. And it was incredibly fortuitous, I think, that this opportunity came up at Aspect that sees me working with an incredibly cool bunch of people, learning a lot every day, but also being able to give back and hopefully influence this world to be, yeah, a more autism friendly world as well. So, just in terms of today's session, what we will be doing is sharing a little bit more with you in relation to autism and our approach at Aspect. You'll also hear through some of what we share, some personal and lived experience stories as well, hopefully just to bring it a little more to life for you. And we will also be sharing with each of you some practical things that the organizations that you may be part of or also that you may be leading, and also just, you in your personal capacity as well might be able to do every day to really manifest a more inclusive world for autistic and neurodivergent people. As Ainslie's mentioned, we really encourage you to use any sensory tools or any personal strategies that you may have available to you to ensure that you're able to participate in the meeting. We encourage you to take movement breaks. So if you need to get up and move around, that is absolutely not an issue from our perspective. And we also are really happy to answer any questions throughout the session, but also very happy for you to capture those in the chat. And I believe Rochelle will have some time for us to answer any Q&As at the end as well. So, just in relation to a very brief outline for you of what we'll be covering, so you can kind of understand where you are at any one point in time. We've obviously spoken through the welcome section already, and Ainsley will cover off in just a small moment, understanding autism and sharing a little bit more with you about what that is, what it looks like, and also how it manifests in, I guess, non-autism friendly environments and the challenges that individuals may experience, both from a community perspective as well as from an employment perspective. I'll be sharing then a little bit more around autism and employment, and specifically what those challenges can look like for autistic individuals. And then we'll also just share a little bit more with you about what we're hoping to achieve through autism-friendly employment at Aspect as well. And then we'll focus, I guess, the majority of the session on supporting you with some really practical strategies and I guess ways of being that you can actually use to support inclusion, as I said, within those own organisations that you're part of, you may be leading, or certainly within your own personal capacities as well. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you, as I mentioned, to ask any questions. So I'm going to hand back over to Ainsley.
Thanks, Kristy. So looking at this slide, we just wanted to cover a little bit of the principles that underpin both our work and this presentation. So before getting into what is autism in more detail. So one of the sort of pillars that we look at is neurodiversity, and neurodiversity is just a fact and that everyone has different brains. So neurodiversity covers everyone. So we all have different brains, they all work differently. And just like biodiversity, those differences are really important for the community, society as a whole, because when you've got different brains and they all think differently and they all work differently and they experience the world differently, it just it can lead to things within like a work context, different ways of solving problems, different ways of thinking, sort of challenging norms as well, if you've got everyone sort of thinking a little bit differently. And when and from the perspective of autism friendly, that's seen as a huge positive that there is that sort of difference in the world. The next pillar, the next principle is the social model of disability. I'm not sure what people's sort of level of pre-existing knowledge is on this, but there's sort of two ways of looking at disability. One's the medical model, and that kind of speaks to that disability exists solely within that person. There's also the social model of disability, and that looks at the role that society plays with disability. So things like a really concrete way of thinking about it is if you're someone who I guess is paralyzed from the waist down and relies on a wheelchair, the environment can be far more difficult and harder to navigate if you don't have if you don't have ramps for sort of wheelchairs to go up and down. That makes the environment significantly more disabling, and it looks at, as well as the inherent challenges for that person, the role that society plays. And at Autism Friendly, we work on that side of disability, trying to break down some of those barriers that exist within society. We also look at working in partnership. So within disability, there's a saying, nothing about us without us. And I like to think of it as like, I guess if you've heard the phrase for us by us, there's no one who knows what autism feels like more than an autistic person. And the same would be said of any disability or difference. And design for all, so universal design. So when you sort of design for the fringes, that can support a whole wide variety of people. And not just necessarily the people that you're trying to design for. So, and I think within this, we look at giving options as well as just trying to create the one perfect thing that can suit everyone. So if you're giving different options that may suit people differently, that's really, really helpful. Okay, so autism is something that occurs in all ages and cultures. I think there's been this misperception in the past that it's something that is a childhood disability, and that once you get to 18, you're magically non-autistic. It doesn't happen that way. Um, it is a lifelong condition. Current statistics estimate that 1 in 40 people are autistic. That has closed over time, that ratio, and it's really just due to better identification and understanding of what that can look like in women and girls. So for the longest time, a lot of women and girls were overlooked because the original diagnostic criteria was built around male presentation. And that's another reason why that sort of ratio is shrinking. No two autistic people are the same. Within our team, you've got a real variety of what autism looks like, and that's influenced by how autism presents in the person as well as personality, because we've all got our own individual personality. Approximately 70% of autistic people are what we call double rainbow. So that means autistic and gender or sexuality diverse. 40% of autistic people have an intellectual disability as well. So that's a really common co-occurring condition with autism, but they are not the same thing. And up to 30% of autistic people don't speak and communicate in other ways. That might look like sign language, AAC, which is augmentative communication. So people typing onto something that looks like a laptop, not a laptop, an iPad, sorry. So, and it also affects like a really wide variety of different things like communication, also how people socialize, sensory, and a variety of other things. Thank you, Kristy. It is a neurodevelopmental condition. It's a disability, but not necessarily a disorder. And it's a hidden or non-visible disability. So that can be a little bit tricky when you're out in the community. And if somebody sees that somebody requires a wheelchair or that they have a guide dog with them, often people will sort of be more than willing to make accommodations or help out. When you have a non-visible disability, that's not necessarily the case because people just can't see it. It's genetically based and lifelong. It is not caused by paracetamol, and a condition that intersects with many and other co-occurring conditions, as I mentioned, with intellectual disability. And I just realized that not everyone would have got the paracetamol joke if you have not been following what's happening in the US and DJT saying that it comes from mothers taking paracetamol, which is absurd. Okay, next slide, please. So when I was talking about sort of the way that autism can present, I think a lot of people have historically considered autism as being more or less autistic, and that someone with higher support needs is more autistic and someone with lower support needs is less autistic. What it actually looks more like is this color wheel. So there's all the ways that autism affects a person. So strengths and interests. I have a really strong fascination with Japan, and I've also got some other ones that are a little bit more niche, like frequent flyer points. You want to know about any program on the planet, I got you. There's also things like communication. Some autistic people, as mentioned, are completely non-speaking. Some people are very articulate but can lose access to speech if they become overwhelmed. And there's a myriad of things in between that as well. Social interactions. I'm someone who's extraordinarily socially anxious. And I didn't really talk to people outside of my family until I was about 18. We've got other people on the team. We've got one who is an absolute yapper, and she jokes about it being difficult to stop her from talking. And she says that herself, so she wouldn't mind me saying that. Leisure and play, sensory. I'm not a hugely sensory person. I can operate in the world without earmuffs, but there's some people who find it very, very difficult from that perspective of autism, thinking, and emotions and emotional regulation. And so different people will experience all of those different component parts of autism very differently. So it can look very, very different from person to person. And oftentimes, if you meet two different autistic people, you wouldn't think that they were the same condition. It can vary from age to age. I've been able to find it easier in some stages of life than others. I got quite used to working in the city. Then when COVID happened and I wasn't doing that, I became out of practice and it became a lot harder. So there's that as well. And you can learn skills over time. Sometimes you have skill regression, environment to environment. I am far easier able to work in an environment that's quiet and doesn't have lights on. And I'm a completely different person in a different environment, and moment to moment, depending on what else is happening for a person at the time. Okay. So barriers in community life. So one of the big barriers can be people, and I am an optimistic person who likes other human beings. And I'd like to say that I think oftentimes sort of judginess and unkindness from others, it comes from a place of just the second point, which is a lack of understanding. So people tend to be judgy and fearful of what they don't understand. So I think those two things go really well together. And I've noticed, like, and as someone who has a higher support needs child, that's been one of the biggest barriers for us, probably earlier in his journey, just going out into the community and experiencing that from other people. These days, I'm older and more mature and don't really care so much, but it can be a huge barrier for people. Um, Intolerance of different forms of communication. Sometimes people aren't really patient with trying to understand what, or maybe don't necessarily understand what somebody's trying to communicate if they're not using spoken words, or if there's someone like me who's incredibly literal. That can cause a bit of friction. Unclear social rules or unwritten expectations. So what that means is there's things that people do just naturally by observing the world and then copying. And it's like you learn these social rules via osmosis. Like the fact that if you get onto a bus and there's a whole lot of free seats, you should probably sit further away from someone than directly next to them. That's not something that you've necessarily been taught as a child. It's just something that you observe growing up. Autistic people don't necessarily always learn things by social osmosis. And so yeah, there can be, if people aren't willing to be patient and kind and explain those things, that can be a barrier as well. Places, once again, many autistic people benefit from really clear signage and instructions. And quite often, when you're going into new places and there's unclear signage or unclear rules as to how you like buy a ticket to a place or things like that, or complicated processes as well without signage, that can be pretty tricky, as well as sensory overwhelm. Some environments can be like really busy, bright, and that can be really tricky as well. Processes I've kind of woven in with places, but I guess it can be standalone as well. So when there's changes to routine, there's waiting, there's new routines or new processes, that can be tricky as well. And it helps to make these things more clear and explicit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ainsley. So I'll pick up from here. One of the joys I've had since starting the role is actually meeting with a number of autistic people, both within aspect and outside of aspect, and really just having a conversation with them to better understand what their lived experience of work and work experience has been, be that paid or unpaid. And it's been really sobering, if I'm honest, to hear a lot of the stories of people both, starting their careers mid-career, but also kind of at the stage of ending their careers as well. And just captured here are some of the, I guess, direct pieces of feedback that individuals have shared. Which really, I guess, highlight and inform the world that we live in and their experiences at the moment. So you'll see there's some common themes, I suppose, that are woven through here. There's a lack of flexibility from the world that we live in to allow people to do things their own way or in a way that better supports them and their needs and their approach and thinking styles. There's a lack of, I guess, understanding, which Ainsley spoke about in terms of, valuing other people's differences and giving time and space for those, rather than just having the assumption that everybody should be the same, I guess, in environments. And this perspective that there's a better understanding of autism right now in the world, or at least an increased understanding of that. And maybe it's like less understanding and more awareness. So an increased awareness of it. But, when it really gets down to offering the level of support or seeking to include people, it probably doesn't extend quite that far as well. So because of these, and I suppose because of what Ainsley has also just shared, autistic people do encounter a significant amount, I guess, of challenge and barriers just to have their place in the world and to be able to be included in the world that we all live in as well. And this really leads to, I guess, the employment challenge that is pretty diabolical, really, when you look at the stats. So the unemployment rate for autistic people here in Australia of working age, and that's assumed to be 18 plus, it's actually 18.2%. So that's more than double the rate for people with disability, and almost 6 times the rate, I guess, of people without disability. So that in and of itself is a significant barrier for economic inclusion and participation as well. More than half of those fortunate autistic Australians who are actually employed at the moment, so 45% of them actually report that their skills exceed their current job requirements, or that they have greater capacity to be able to work than what they may be working. And this is what we refer to as the underemployment crisis. So they may be working part-time when actually they really do want to be able to work full-time and have the capacity to do that. But it is also some of the stigma that assumes that people who are autistic are less capable and therefore more likely to find themselves in entry-level positions within organisations as well, which isn't necessarily the case, and it certainly shouldn't be, I guess, the kind of standard that we aspire to. Research definitely informs the level of barriers that we understand autistic people are experiencing, and they range from lacking support to be able to find roles, but also being able to keep those that they do find, difficulty attending interviews when they're really not set up for the differences that autistic people may experience the world with, and certainly that lack of understanding about autism. So there might be that greater level of awareness, but truly understanding what that is and being able to accommodate for that, I think, is really important as well. And quite soberingly, it's estimated that around 45% of autistic people are actually living near or in poverty as a result of them being unemployed. So, I mean, we all recognize that being able to be employed and, meaningfully contribute from a workforce participation perspective is, incredibly important from our economic inclusion perspective. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily experienced in the same ways that we would otherwise like it to be for autistic individuals. So what is actually getting in the way? It's no surprise here that some of what Ainslie spoke about in terms of the barriers that are getting in the way from a community participation perspective actually are also the same barriers that exist in terms of being able to provide meaningful employment opportunities for autistic individuals as well. So in the first, and I won't labour this much more, but it is that employer understanding and confidence in being able to engage with and include autistic employees within workforce and workplace experiences. There is this outdated notions, stereotypes and misconceptions that, as Ainslie spoke about, that I guess kind of see that really narrow perspective of who autistic people are and how they show up. It is what leads obviously to that underemployment where there's this expectation almost or misconception that people who are autistic are less capable than everybody else and therefore are only capable of entry-level positions. And that really is an outdated stereotype and misconception. And I see that, time and time again with the incredible and brilliant people that, work alongside me, both being autistic and non-autistic as well. We have a pretty standard and traditional hiring approach that manifests itself, I think, in every corner of the workforce. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we might be able to challenge some of what is traditional and kind of those preconceived approaches and think differently in a way that may actually be able to better include and support participation from autistic individuals. And interestingly, what's really getting in the way as well is these unmet needs and misunderstandings. Time and time again, I heard it through the interviews that I did with our autistic colleagues, both internal and external to Aspect. One of the stories that stood out most for me is that it was an individual who, really every kind of 6 to 12 months was moving on from their employment and, moving on into a new role if they were fortunate enough to. And what it came down to was actually their inability to think that they could ask questions on how to do things or to clarify the way things were needed to be done because of the perception that if they asked questions, they'd be perceived as being dumb or less than within a workplace context. So, it was essentially that their needs hadn't been met. It hadn't been explicitly explained to them that no question was a silly question and that questions weren't only permissible at the time that you joined an organisation, but you could still ask them throughout. And had that been the case for somebody, and this individual in particular, where that psychological safety was really established up front, then it may have meant that they were able to be retained in their employment for a lot longer as well. And I think misunderstandings is something else, misunderstanding that if you don't socially engage with people, that you're not really engaged in your role, or, if you're not able to look people in the eye, that, you're not, I guess, confident, but equally, if you're not able to respond very quickly and off the cuff and, speak confidently, then actually, you are thought to be, again, less capable or less than. And all of these things are essentially just different ways of being that it would be wonderful if the world was actually able to be more embracing and inclusive of. And I think interestingly as well, there are, I guess, incorrect assumptions being made time and time again about the cost of inclusion, that it is complex to be inclusive, that it is highly expensive to be inclusive, where actually the research indicates that most, if not all, accommodations are able to be provided free or at very low cost. And that those accommodations are actually able to be, I guess, game changers for people being able to retain and contribute meaningfully in employment as well. So, at Aspect, I spoke about our new service, which is autism-friendly employment. And essentially, we're wanting to come at it from a very different perspective. There's a lot of organisations, and full credit is given to them as well for the work that they do to support individuals moving into meaningful employment. But we really want to flip that script and think about how can we do that differently. And that's us wanting to partner with organisations, essentially to work with those organisations to create inclusive and autism-friendly organisations that really work for everyone. So this is about getting to the systems, it's about getting to the environments, and it's about thinking how we can change those rather than expecting autistic individuals to change to fit in with them. And so there's a few things that we would love to share with you. As I said, just, practical strategies that you may be able to employ in your day-to-day life, but also in your organizations or your businesses that you may lead as well, that really can go a long way to supporting greater inclusion. And what we say, and Ainslie spoke about a little bit earlier as well, is that whilst we might be thinking of these and designing these with a real intention of being more inclusive of autistic individuals, the likelihood is that these will create better experiences for everybody at work as well. So benefiting a broader cross-section of employees out there. And so I'll hand over to Ainslie just to share a little bit more about the framework that we approach supporting inclusion with, and then I'll jump into sharing more about some of the strategies we think you might be able to take away and start using as well.
Okay, so I think when we started creating this service, which was done in little bits and bobs until Kristy came on board at the beginning of the year and really pulled all of the stuff that we'd done previously together into this like beautiful framework. We were looking at little bits and pieces that could make a difference, but really like to have a really autism-friendly organization. There's these main headings that I think that most things sit under that can make a real difference if done well. And they are preparation and predictability. I think with a lot of autistic people, part of the battle is that preparation is a severe anxiety about what's going to happen, or like around going into, like, you're going into a new environment with employment, and what are these people going to be like? What are they going to ask me? What's the standard there? What's the status quo? And all of those sorts of things. And if you can ameliorate some of that anxiety, it's really, really helpful, and it allows people to sort of bring them their best self, whether that's interview, first day, or if there's changes in things within the organization, moving sort of further into that life cycle. Also, communication supports. As mentioned previously, speech is not necessarily the only way that autistic people can communicate, and it's for some it's not accessible at all. Structure and visual communication, as well as sensory adaptations and proactive problem solving. One other thing that we found has been really helpful is staff training. So I think a lot of the time, when you look at traditional programs for inclusion of autistic people that have been involved in sort of helping people set up their CV and train them how to do an interview, and there might be a little bit of support if and when they get a role. Without training sort of whole staff, they're moving into an environment that's not necessarily going to be understanding. So I think staff training is really important, that if you train an entire organization to be more inclusive and more understanding, the likelihood, like once again, it's a hypothesis, but likelihood is that that person is going to be more likely to be able to exist in that environment. And then as this is a really new area, and so reviewing and improving, like what's gone well with this, how can we constantly build on this and become better? And that's something that we can sort of walk organizations through and sort of work with them on.
Perfect. Thanks, Ainsley. So, taking into account this framework, which is what we call our autism-friendly framework, I'm just going to share three specifically, I guess, kind of more practical inclusion strategies that you may be able to employ. And the first is the use of an inclusion statement. So you would have heard Ainslie do this at the beginning of the session today. And quite typically well, actually at Aspect, we use these religiously, and we quite typically include them at the kind of end of the acknowledgement of country. So, both of them are really an intention to set this explicit culture of inclusion, both from an acknowledgement of country perspective, but this is then why we include this inclusion statement as well. We highly recommend that, again, you would have seen ours, and there was more information that you can access on our Aspect website as well about the inclusion statement. But it doesn't have to follow the same script. It can be very personalized and customized for you and your experiences as well. And we do, highly recommend that you collaborate with diverse voices and ensure that they're included there as well. We incorporate it very much into our daily routines, so it is typically used in every one of our meetings, perhaps with the exception of a one-on-one meeting where it's pretty much understood that you're able to employ the strategies that work for you. Yeah, you can include it in your meetings, you can include it in your presentations, and really it's, again, creating that explicit culture of welcome that says, even though you may be different in the way that you present, and you may need to get up and walk around, or you may need to be off camera, that's absolutely fine and it's welcome here. So, we absolutely encourage those personal comfort strategies, and they may be different for different people. But what we do strongly suggest is that, you use examples of what those actually are as well. So, again, it's just giving that explicit permission for people to actually engage in that way. And I think what's really important is that we don't just say it, but we also live it as well. So, to the extent that you're saying you might jump off camera or you've got fidget toys, being able to make that actually quite visible for people, again, is another sign where actually we're not just saying that this is okay, we're actually demonstrating that it is okay as well. And what you're seeing in that picture there is Aspect's inclusion statement in the foyer of our, I guess, kind of reception area, which again is just a physical manifestation of the fact that this is who we are and this is what we stand by, and that everyone, irrespective of how you present, is very much welcome in this environment and encouraged to be yourself and do what you may need to do to participate. So that's something that we'd strongly encourage each of you to think about doing. It doesn't have to be long, just a couple of sentences, but again, that explicit permission that's granted through this inclusion statement is something that can be incredibly powerful to granting permission for people to be able to access what they need to be able to fully engage. Secondly, thinking about how we can create more inclusive recruitment practices. And as a HR professional of, more than 20 years, I'm kind of gobsmacked that I didn't really understand what I do now. One of the things is, in my view, interviews are essentially only really a good way of understanding how confidently somebody's able to articulate themselves and how quickly they're able to access past experiences. None of which is necessarily incredibly important for them to be able to do the role that you might be recruiting for. So we are making sure, and certainly very much living this at Aspect. And, it was startling to me as, somebody who doesn't identify as autistic, but I was given the questions that I was going to be asked in the interview ahead of time so that I could prepare for that. But, somebody who, sometimes finds it really hard to actually craft a narrative and do that quite succinctly, it was something that was incredibly powerful for me to support my confidence being able to go in to the interview as well. So, there are lots of other examples here that are mentioned, but thinking about, clear and concise language and making sure that that language isn't able to be taken as literally as what it may be by autistic individuals. Making sure that jargon that might be fully understood by you but might not be by others is actually removed from any of those job ads or position descriptions. I think one of the other things that we do at Aspect, which Ainslie spoke about in terms of that preparation and predictability, we were provided with not only interview questions, but also who were we meeting with? Why were they wanting to ask those questions? What were the directions to get to the office? All of those things that really just supported that level of preparation and predictability that, as somebody who's not autistic, I found incredibly valuable as well. And, we again use that inclusion statement at the beginning of our interview. So we encourage people, if they're meeting face to face, to, use their fidgets, that if they would like to get up and move around, that's absolutely okay as well. But thinking about the ways that we might be able to really change up the traditional approaches to hiring to ensure that they're more inclusive, not just of autistic people, but everybody, and, supporting a more confident experience for them where they can put their best selves forward, and, no doubt then lead to more meaningful opportunities, not only for autistic employees, but more diverse hiring as well, and better hiring experiences too. And then last but by no means the least, and I'm super conscious of time, but this is a tool that we use called My Work Profile. And time again, and even back in the HR days when I was working as well, we would have leaders come to us and say, look, I've got this employee. They might not know if they're autistic, but if they do, they might tell you that. But I need to let the rest of the team know a little bit more about how they can work with them. And how do I do that? And I think the best recommendation for you is that you can't do that in isolation. So you need to create the culture and the approach where actually everybody participates in a way that actually allows that information from those people wanting to disclose it to actually kind of be given the time and space to be shared. And this is how we do it at Aspect. So we have something called the My Work Profile. It, is something that you complete when you start at an organisation, but you regularly update and refine it because people change. And as Ainslie said, those needs can fluctuate as well for autistic individuals. So we capture things around communication preferences. We talk about planning and organising, personal culture and identity, strengths and interests, which is where I discovered Ainslie's love for travel and all things Disney, sensory and physical preferences and needs, as well as personal culture and identity too. So I think what's really important is what separates this approach to perhaps others is that it's not just an approach that asks you to share that information, but then we really ask for you to think about how it is that the rest of the team is able to support you, knowing that information and then being able to use that. So, an example is Tom, who's my leader, shared that his communication preference, given he's quite often, in back-to-back meetings and those sorts of things, or out speaking with clients, is not to receive unprompted kind of phone calls, but actually to receive a message. Now, he finds that far more efficient because he can then respond to that message, letting me know when he's able to actually speak, rather than us kind of playing that, ridiculous game of phone tag and it being a completely inefficient use of everybody's time. So that was something that I was able to get an understanding of and accelerated my ability to work with Tom incredibly quickly by virtue of actually being able to go through this My Work Profile exercise. But just, I guess, a few other bits and pieces is that it's really important that leaders share these first. There is a level of vulnerability, that the previous speakers were sharing as well. And so leaders being able to create the space and permission to be able to do that is really important. It's important that time and flexibility are given to people so they don't have to fill the boxes out if they want, if they prefer to do an infographic or if they prefer to do it in pictures, that's absolutely fine. And if they don't feel like they can do it straight up, that's okay as well. So it's, a process that supports people to share that information when it's, time and readiness is available to them. We ensure that these are accessible all of the time, so they sit in a shared drive for us. So as new people join the team, they're actually able to go and read everybody's My Work Profiles before they're able to share theirs. And again, it just grants that, I guess, permission and access as well. And as I was saying earlier, whilst we recognise that these sorts of tools are designed to better support and be inclusive of autistic and neurodivergent individuals, the reality is that everybody benefits them. For me, starting the learning of how to best work with people was vastly accelerated in this environment than it has been in any other environment. literally by use of this actual tool as well.